Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you also for the invitation. Thank you all for coming. I'm really delighted to be here, not least because I'm looking forward to dinner afterwards. I like eating here, but the first time I came to Germany, I realized that my stomach had been designed in order to eat German food. I could quite happily chew on cows till the end of days. It's just brilliant. So I'm delighted for many reasons to be here. There is another text which is just about to be translated into German called, I don't know the German title yet, but the English title is Being and Slime. So I think the German is likely to be Sein und Schleim, about which I'm delighted. So, and that is actually about the work of Lawrence Oken, who's a 19th century biologist who was the first person to theorize and to make experiments on protoplasm, which he called Urschleim. So that's why Being and Slime. Okay, it was also just irresistible as a title. I challenge anyone to resist such a thing. What I'm going to talk today about is a combination of three elements. The first is Malevich's theory of the non-objective world. The second is Romanticism, and the third is the philosophy of nature. Now, my title, the working title I had was exactly this, Romanticism and Ontological Suprematism, but the title I've given it, for reasons which will become clear in the aftermath, is the world, the aeroplane, the tick, our dust, nature, Romanticism, and suprematist ontology. Okay. It took 14 billion years to produce this image, for time to present its partial self-portrait. It raises many questions, of course, concerning the character of time, the imageability of creation, and the barrier or horizon that prevents image being its content rather than itself. The image presents the early universe approximately 1 billion years after the Big Bang, and it was taken in 2004, which is just worth pausing a moment to think about. It's only now that we are far enough removed in time from the Big Bang that we can photograph sufficiently far back in time to get within 1 billion years of it. This is a photograph of the universe at 1 billion years of age. You can imagine its birthday cake with 1 billion candles on it, if you like. And it's only now we can do this. And we do this by taking a photograph of the darkest things in the universe. The things which exude most blue light, which are receding fastest from us. We do that in order to make a photographic image of the first billion years of the universe that could not have existed until this point. That photograph would have been impossible until the technology had caught up sufficiently with nature in order to be able to photograph a state long since extinct. So it's really worth pondering that. It's called the Hubble Deep Field, the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, and it emphasizes the coextensivity of space and time, insofar as the further back into the universe seeing reaches, the deeper into time it descends. For all the marveling we might do concerning Das, was Wissen schafft, which is a pun made by Johann Wilhelm Ritter in 1806 in a text called Die Physik als Kunst, what knowing makes, the image does not, of course, present the inexistence antecedent, not merely to the pictured universe, the pictured infant universe that we see here, nor that inexistence, according to the hypothesis, antecedent to the universe's emergence. At the same time, the image of the antecedent is itself consequent upon not only the pictured universe, but a pre-pictured one. In other words, the image of the universe has two antecedents. The first is the universe that has not been pictured yet. The second is the universe that does not yet exist. And both, I'm going to argue, are necessary. There are two antecedents, one of which is inexistence. Okay? So I'm going to argue that both of these are necessary. As such, the image is additive with respect to the universe. It's a new entity in the universe. It's a new part of nature, if you consider that this is the image of the universe 1 billion years after its generation, its initial generation. Thus, physically expressed, the image is an instance of individuation and marks an increase of the Earth's surface. There is more on the Earth than used to be. The ultra-deep field shows, in other words, that every journey into the past takes place not only in the future of that past, which is simply entailed by being able to journey into it, it also shows that, as a result, this past is consequent upon the future in which it is made. Okay, now don't worry too much. Think about the pattern. I'll be coming back to this. This is a sketch which should inculcate, as it were, the pattern with which I'm working. It's a pattern to do with temporality and to do with antecedents. Okay, two antecedents, basically, what you need to know. One of them is in existence of whatever it is that subsequently exists but is antecedent to its image, in the case of the Hubble ultra-deep field. Okay, so the past is consequent upon a future in which it is made. In other words, this past did not exist as a past until 2004. And that, as a result, the past for which the infant universe was a future remains a past undisturbed by Hubble's intrusions. That is to say, even though we have an image of this, the antecedent past to the image of this, i.e. the universe before it was pictured on the one hand, but also the universe before it existed on the other, both of those remain undisturbed by Hubble's ultra-deep field. It has not been photographed. The photograph is a past consequent upon a future state of the universe, 13 billion years after the age of the universe in this photograph. From this perspective, despite the fact that the universe irrevocably antedates its being imaged, there must be a universe there in order that it be photographed, it would not be impossible to image creation itself, or what amounts to the same, the inexistent universe. But the imaged creation would be the future of the unimaged rather than its reproduction, and would amount to the production within the universe of its own inexistence. Okay, again, a lot to swallow, but never mind for the time being. Accordingly, the irreducible remainder of imaged inexistence will be the existent universe. For the same reason, however, the third or remainder of a newly existent universe is precisely its inexistence, from which alone, according to the earliest system program of German idealism, authored by Schelling, Hölderlin and Hegel, creation can be understood, that is, as emergent out of nothingness, and that is, historically or temporally. Together with free, self-conscious being, the earliest system program continues, an entire world emerges out of nothingness. Okay. That may sound like a claim that consciousness is necessary in order that a world emerge. It is not such a claim. It's a claim about that there is consciousness alters the world that emerges for it. It is this inexistence, the nothingness or not being of the universe, which, once there is a universe, is paradoxically ineliminable, cannot be got rid of. Temporality, as Schelling insists, is always in excess of what is, because what is not singular being, it's not this or that object, but consists in Wirksamsein, in being operative. Of temporality, therefore, he writes, everything is temporal, the actuality of which is exceeded by the essence, or that is das Wesen, or in which more essence is contained than it can hold within actuality. I've forgotten the order of my slides. Yeah. Okay, everything is temporal, the actuality of which is exceeded by the essence, das Wesen, or in which more essence is contained than it can hold within actuality. As to the character or form of this temporality, Schelling gives two forms of containment or conceiving pertinent to the problem of creation. In the first, essence or Wesen exceeds actuality or operativity, that is Wirksamsein. In the second, temporality contains more essence than can be accommodated within current operativity. Actuality, Wirklichkeit, cannot accommodate all that is Wirksamsein. Temporality is what spills over from non-exhaustive operations, such as the production of inexistence. Accordingly, creation is consequent upon creation, or all creation is creation squared. This is, according to Novalis, the ontology that Romanticism appeals to. The time of universal anarchy, lawlessness, freedom nature in its natural state, the time before the world, which he interestingly adds in parentheses there, the state. Pre-world time provides, as it were, the dispersed traces of post-world time. Chaos is creation fulfilled. It's interesting. It is not the case that creation arises from chaos, rather chaos is the fulfillment of creation. The future world is rational chaos, self-permeating chaos, chaos squared, or the infinite. What's important here is that there is a nature in its natural state which is pre-world time, and what that can be must be the ascription of nature to the inexistent universe. Nature is not coterminous with the existent universe. If that were the case, there's no way of getting from an inexistent universe to an existing one. The fact that there is an existent universe and the hypothesis that it is not eternal means that nature is not coextensive with the existing universe. Again, temporality, and again, a time before the world. But note the complication here introduced. The pre-world chaos, antecedent to a universe sufficiently ordered to be imageable, does not resolve into a law-governed world, but is itself the product or satisfaction of creation. Temporality is differentiated into past or future only by the orders or powers of chaos. And by powers, I mean, as Novalis has it, chaos squared. The emergence and the collapse of a cosmos is the rational and the actual metric of time. Rational chaos is therefore nature to the second power. We may say then that Romanticism persists wherever there arises the hypothesis of a futural pre-world time that is neither eliminated in nor from creation. Hence the Romanticism of the Hubble ultra-deep field. Hence also the Romanticism, as we shall see, of Malevich's non-objective world. I want to insist not only that Romanticism and idealism had not been eliminated, but rather augmented by, let's say, abstraction in the plastic arts, productivity in the sciences, or the concept in philosophy. But also that this fact owes its status to what we might call the insuperability of the concept in philosophy. Or more generally, we might call this the insuperability of abstraction. If we cannot conceive what lies outside our conceivings, this is really the central point, the abstraction point is this. If we cannot conceive what lies outside our conceivings, then either it must be the case that as transcendental philosophy we remain within our conceivings, but insist we can at least conceive of what it is that we do not conceive. Right? That's what Kant says. Right? The noumenon in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason is precisely what is intelligible, but about which there can be no knowledge. It's intelligible and rational. Therefore, we can make an attempt inferentially to know what it is we cannot conceive. If we regard that as hopeless, if we regard that as a lost cause, then either we have to regard the entire question of the concept insuperability, that is, there is no concept outside of our conceivings, as being the limits of everything there is. The limits of my language are the world, as Wittgenstein had it. Or we have to consider reality as consisting, at least in part, in concepts. That is to say, abstraction is real. And I simply don't see that, in fact, we have much option. If abstraction isn't real, explain to me what the white square on white is. If abstraction isn't real, why are there concepts? What is a number if abstraction isn't real? Interestingly, everyone raises at this point the Fibonacci sequence as evidence that, in fact, number is real. In fact, it's implicit in even the term geometry, that the measurement of things is a measurement of the earth. It's the measurement of things that actually are. There's an ontic dimension to geometry, in other words, that takes all metrics from things that exist on the earth. So there's a realism implicit, even in number. And if you talk to most mathematicians or philosophers of mathematics, you'll find that most of them are Platonists. Unapologetically. Yeah, of course there are real numbers. They're just not identical with actual used numbers. What a shock to the system. No wonder they can think about the inexistent universe. They're Platonists. But this is why, if nature includes the genesis of a universe, it is not possible to think about the true state of the universe without being an idealist. That is to say, without being committed to the realism about abstraction. Okay? So that's my plot, as it were. I plan to overthrow so much intellectual history, it makes me dizzy. Okay. If we cannot conceive what lies outside our conceivings, as transcendental philosophy and its various contemporaneous offshoots contend, then how is it possible that realism can survive? According to Robert Brandom, for example, concept-applying creatures are not, to that extent, biological entities, but occupants of and actors in the space of reasons. Accordingly, he completes what he takes to be Kant's fundamental philosophical shift from ontology to deontology, that is, from is to ought. Although Brandom denies that this eliminates naturalistic realism from philosophy's purview, the denial is issued only on the basis of shared deontological or normative character entailed by occupying the space of reasons, one which privileges, in his words, inference over reference. That is to say, it's never the content of the proposition, but the form of the proposition that matters. In other words, our structures of inference are formally correct or not, and that is what matters, not the content of the proposition. Say anything about anything, you're saying nothing unless you're saying it in accordance with the form rather than the content. If you like, the primacy of the practical entails that the abstract be taken as the more real. I'm not denying that there are concepts and that conceptual work is insuperable in all conceiving, but I do deny that we can unproblematically determine the consequent space of reasons as being, therefore, not nature, since to do so relies precisely on a negative assertion concerning what reason is, that either privileges reference over inference, i.e. being over practice, or maintains rational anti-realism regarding what is as a kind of regulative ideal, perhaps cashed out as the final ground of all inferential practice. That is to say, we either think that there is only the space of reasons, and that we can therefore characterize our rational practice as being more important than being, that is, reference or the content of a proposition. And bear in mind, this is only one account of what it is to make a proposition that is contentful vis-a-vis being, that the proposition has content. Or we can claim that, in fact, the real is going to, at some point, coincide with the content of our propositions, providing only that they're formally correct. So all we need really do is pay sufficient attention to abstraction, and realism will be the result. So it can hang over everything we think. It can hang over there like a utopian state in which finally thinking reality will be coincident with its production. In other words, this is a fantasy of Adamic speech. This is like the lordly right of giving names, as Nietzsche paraphrases the book of Genesis. This is like the ability to be able to speak something and cause it to come into existence. Okay. It's for these reasons that Malevich's theory of the world as non-objectivity is important, and ultimately, as its title argues, the world as non-objectivity. The claim is not that because non-objective art abandons imitation and expression, it therefore abandons realism, but rather that the world is non-objectively. In other words, the thesis that Malevich promulgates is directly ontological. It is not to say that realism is a state of painting. It's rather to say abstraction is the better realism because that's the state of things. Okay, that's the claim. That's why the world as non-objectivity, rather than the world with non-objectivity in it, or non-objectivity given the hideous state of the world, and so forth. But if the realism Malevich advocates for non-objectivism, insofar as this consists in a knowing of what is, cannot ultimately be partitioned from the works of science, as he constantly argues. From what it is, in other words, that knowing creates. It is not by virtue of their various objects, that is, stars for scientists, paintings for artists, or concepts for philosophers, that their fields are realist in the sense I wish to spell out, but rather by virtue of the ubiquity of the third structure, that is to say, the irresolvability of all things into reason, or of all antecedents into consequence. Right? Something that absorbed all of its antecedents into its consequent would be like, for example, a perfectly balanced universe, half of which contains non-existence, the other half of which contains existence. It's only if the whole universe becomes existent as a result of the absorption or elimination of the inexistent half that we can have such a thing as a consequent which is the sum total of its antecedent. If anyone wants to know, this is Leibniz's account of the principle of sufficient reason, actually, that the full cause is exhausted in the whole effect. And it's interesting that the principle of sufficient reason arises for Leibniz in the context of physics. Okay, so what I want to argue instead is the ubiquity of the surge structure that the concept of creation entails. In other words, I will argue that realism entails this structure to be universal precisely insofar as it rules out its non-occurrence. That is to say, this structure is universal because it insists on an antecedent not resolvable into its consequent. It's only universal to the extent that it rules out its non-occurrence. Okay? So there can be no state which fully exhausts all its antecedents. In other words, there is no such thing as an effect, which is the totality of all its causes. If that were the case, then in fact we would have an eternal cosmos. So these things are contingent upon a universe that comes into existence, which I don't think is too huge a leap. Although I'm really interested if people want to argue for what Propas called the eternity of the world. It's a fascinating concept. We'll see how Malevich in a moment manages to get round this problem. In other words, I will argue that realism entails the structure to be universal precisely insofar as it rules out its non-occurrence. That is, creation means that nothing that is not surd-like, does not involve an irreducible remainder or an antecedent that is not exhausted in its consequent. Thus, I make two interrelated claims. The first, although it will come at the end, is to set out what I take to be a realist case as to why the philosophy of nature is not a casualty of transcendental philosophy, as might be and has been inferred from Kant by Brandom and by McDowell, for example. The second is that while there are good reasons to assume an irreversibility with regard to artistic, conceptual, or natural creation, that is to say, with regard to the history of these various disciplines, i.e. that we cannot turn the clock back, nor can we pretend that objects of a pre-crisis science are the same as those of a post-crisis science. We err if we infer from this that each instance of such creation so differs in kind from its predecessor states that no realism is possible that is not local to a particular state. In other words, this is a kind of genealogy of why it is that realism became a genre. Why it is that realism is a subspecies of certain types of literary practice, of certain types of metaphysics, and so forth. What a crazy thought. There are many things we can do, some of them aren't real. That seems to me to be question-begging, at the very least. How can we do things that aren't real? Let's say we're suffering from delusions. I'm conscious of delusions because there are people interested in Freud in the audience. Let's say we have delusions. Are delusions real? Manifestly they are. Are we doing something that is not real, therefore, insofar as we have delusions? Manifestly not, or they would not occur. Therefore, delusions are real. The idea that they're not is absurd, it seems to me. Okay, so with this out the way, and by out the way I mean stored in your back pocket so that it can be brought out later to challenge what follows, I want to move on to discussing Malevich and his suprematist theory of creation. Okay, this is the beginning of his account. It's really strange. Not in vain have little aeroplanes emerged from the bowels of the earth. Right there. Isn't that just great? Little aeroplanes. We were talking earlier about mining schools. Imagine going underground, you're hacking away, to get coals or jewels, depending on whether it's the 20th or the 19th rather, or the 18th century. And out instead pops an aeroplane. It's a Lufthansa from a mine. Absolutely fantastic. This is what Malevich is imagining, but there's good reason to do so. Not in vain have little aeroplanes emerged from the bowels of the earth. They will not be stopped on earth by a three-dimensional law. They will fly to the place whence they have come. They are the dust of the earth, which flies off the earth's surface, and by this pulverize the globe. Everything is striving to leave the globe and to make its way further into space. But thanks to the relationship between the elements which have not yet been discovered, it sits like a tick on the earth. Okay, now I'm going to leave this up for a while because what follows refers to one of these numbered points in each of them. They're my interpolations, as it were. At first sight, Malevich is simply offering a description of the origins of mechanical flight, viewed from two perspectives. The one is terrestrial, and the other is cosmological or godlike. It's terrestrial when we see a plane take off. That is to say, sometimes, and I was doing this yesterday, sometimes we see a plane take off and we think, whoa, how come that giant metal tube is hanging in midair by sheer velocity? You know, you're stunned by the extraordinary character of this machine in the sky. On the other hand, however, there is a godlike view. Viewed from across all time, what is an airplane taking off but a species of dust? In fact, you get a sense of this landing at Frankfurt Airport. You know, when you drive around for 40 minutes in an aircraft, try to find an empty parking space, which happens in Frankfurt Airport, then you notice that, in fact, one plane taking off is meaningless. One plane is dust. Imagine viewing the Earth through a telescope from another galaxy, and imagine your telescope is so powerful that it can pick out flight. It can pick out the fact of flight. Okay, they're technologically advanced, but not worth troubling about. Yeah? You would see a halo of dust around the globe. And what's more, it would move around the globe in accordance with the sun. It would be a valid inference, therefore, that all flight on Earth is solar powered. But only if you live in another galaxy. I think if you're up close and see it, then you can possibly think that. Okay, so that's the local perspective as compared or contrasted with the cosmological or godlike one. To clarify the significance of this passage, I've singled out 7 points worthy of note. Firstly, in this account, aircraft do not take off from airports, but emerge from subterranean worlds. The scope of the flight is larger than its starting or end points, or the essential operations involved in it exceed the actuality of the flight. The first point, then, is that the aeroplane's natural history encompasses the ores from which the metals making it up were smelted, the formation of these ores in geological time, the discovery of electromagnetism, and so forth. It is not because mechanical flight is insignificant from the point of view of an overseeing God or an alien with a powerful telescope, therefore, but rather from that of the natural history amongst the later products of which the aeroplane may be included, that we have this perspective shift or perspective effect. We may summarize this as the thesis that technology is nature. Okay, how could it be otherwise? Imagine a technology that does not in fact consist in any parts that are mined, synthesized, or otherwise produced from chemical or material elements which are not part of the Earth. Imagine also, or part of the cosmos, imagine also that we do something, we manage to make a machine which fails to operate in accordance with natural law. Imagine that. If that's possible to imagine, then it is not the case that technology is nature. If it is possible to imagine, technology could not be conceived without nature. Technology is nature. And I'm reminded at this point of McLuhan's claim about what media are. He says that media are precisely an environment. That's to say, the media for us are like water for a fish. They're not like the frame around a picture. They're rather the thing we live in. They're the environment we live in. Media ecology is McLuhan's. It's a brilliant account, and in fact displaces a lot of the stuff that we might automatically associate with the difference between nature and technology. But I emphasize, I think there's a realist reason why technology is technology. That is to say, wholly compliant with natural law, and moreover, materially consisting in exactly the same elements as everything else. You know, a robot is not so weird. I actually work in an institution with a robot lab, and they're busy. They've been for the last 15 years making intelligent robots. This is somewhat dependent, of course, on the intelligence of the robot engineers, but nevertheless, the robots that they have created have learned to sufficiently differentiate one from each other, and also the members of staff in the department who have been there long enough. So, you know, the idea of an artificial intelligence, which incidentally has been around since Homer, the idea of an artificial intelligence is not against nature, nor is it unimaginable. It's occurring around us. The second point, point 2, on our quote, concerns how it is that the flight exceeds the limitations of terrestrial geometry. As is implicit in the term geometry, it contains not the measurement of all dimensions, but those of the Earth. It is a local science, one tied to its object. That there are other dimensions, and not purely spatial ones, as one affirms, that is to say, it takes account of history, that is to say, time, again attests to the excess of essence over actuality, or of the operation over a merely local what is. What is the Earth? What is flight? What is a plane? Point 3 approaches the core of the problem, however, insofar as it offers one solution to the flight path problem with which the passage as a whole is concerned, and which I have yet to explicate. That is, the passage asks whether the flight, as what Malevich will call an additional element or culture of action, is a line or a curve. Here it is asserted that aeroplanes, and by extension natural history, will fly to the place whence they have come. That is, that its flight paths are going to be circular, such that origin and endpoints are identical. We'll call this the A trajectory. Thus, point 4 completes the circuit of the A trajectory, from dust to dust. From the dust that the flight constitutes to the Earth, its elements exhausted in flight, is pulverized, becomes dust again, opening the crucial question of whether first dust is the same as second. Okay? Is the dust before the flight the same as the dust that the flight becomes? That's the question. And it really isn't more complex than that. It's just, are they the same or are they different? If they're the same, however, no flight has occurred. If a flight has occurred, dust 1 and dust 2 are different. Hence, it's possible to call them dust 1 and dust 2. They may, in other words, be materially indistinguishable. That is, dust is dust. And this is indeed why Michael Moorcock set a short story called The Heat Death of the Universe in a Domestic Kitchen. So if they are indistinguishable, dust is dust, by virtue of their material constituents, then does it follow from that that therefore they are one and the same? Or is there something different about dust 2 with respect to dust 1, namely, in this instance, flight? Against, therefore, point 4, from dust to dust, point 5 reposes the problem of the flight path, not in terms of orbit, but of striving. If essential operations exceed actuality, then this amounts to a realism concerning striving that is, for that reason, not restricted to the aeroplane or the Earth. With point 6, therefore, it is not the aeroplane or the pilot, which Malevich never mentions. It's like he has such perfect faith in aeroplanes that pilots are totally unnecessary, which someone should have pointed out to Airbus, I think, at a certain point. It is not the airplane or the pilot that strives, rather everything is striving. In other words, there is nothing that isn't striving to abandon, ultimately, the Earth for space. 6, therefore, opens B trajectory, that of the line, the aerial element, as Malevich will say in his essay, The Additional Element in Painting, concerning the suprematist line. Striving is a straight line insofar as striving is considered as such and not in regard to the objects within which it is caught. That is to say, it is not my striving or the striving of an aircraft or the striving of any other object or entity that makes striving striving. Striving is everything. Everything is striving, which means that entities need to be recashed out in terms of striving. I mean, if we hold it to be true. So there is no such thing as something that is and does not strive. Right. That's the claim. And he expressly says this. Everything is striving to abandon the Earth for space. The B trajectory is the aerial element, therefore. Striving is a straight line insofar as striving is considered as such and not in regard to the objects within which it is caught. Yet no sooner is the B trajectory set against the A trajectory than an animal skepticism rears up to recapture striving amongst objects. The aeroplane does not leave Earth, but as in the last line, it's not enough that we have dust and aeroplanes and the Earth and the bowels of the Earth. We now have ticks as well. Malevich is slowly populating his strange arc with items that are hitherto as diverse, if you like, as the items collected on the serialist's ironing board. The aeroplane does not, therefore, leave the Earth according to this animal skepticism, but sits like a tick on the planet, locked into its changeless position. It does so, however, owing to elements which have not yet been discovered. The tick cycle, that is a physical problem. What are the elements that will enable terrestrial departure? If finally, then, 3 appears to be confirmed by the tick model, and 3, just to remind myself, is that they will fly to the place whence they have come. So if the return flight being the same as the outward flight appears to be confirmed by the tick model, that is that the local holds flight captive, flight will never leave the Earth for all its striving, that return is not a habit, but a physically insuperable cycle. If this is the case, then our attention is focused on the presupposition of the Earth evident in point 1. I want to cash this out. In what respect is it even relevant that the Earth is presupposed? Why not presuppose the Earth? We're standing on it. We're in it. We are it. Why not presuppose it? It is presupposed in our existence. But nevertheless, why presuppose the Earth? We must ask the question. The natural history on which flight is dependent, that is mineralogy, metallurgy, manufacture, electricity and combustion, is a fact concerning the actual Earth. While therefore it cannot be disregarded, it is therefore the ultimate presupposition, the ground upon which all else occurs, and to which therefore the flight path of dust must return. Okay, so we can't disregard the Earth, but precisely because it is, if it's a physical fact that everything must return, that point to which everything will return. If, however, the reason for the presupposition of Earth is itself history, that is the natural history, where the plane came from, that is the bowels of the Earth, yeah? If this is a natural history, and it's as a result of that natural history that we want to claim that the Earth is a presupposition, then if this is the case, then surely this applies paradigmatically to the Earth itself. It too must have a history, a past. The Earth's past, in Malevich, is first signalled by its future, that is, the future of dust. But it is made explicit in the following additional line, which I designate as point 8, and which discusses the Earth's future, a future already encountered in point 4. And it's a nice gloomy one. Oh, no, it's not. I've gone too far. No, I haven't. Possibly our globe itself will be pulverized, as once a huge lump was pulverized, creating the globe. Okay? This is the horror that we have to expect from our future. The Earth will disintegrate. Dust will be dust. It sounds like a funeral. This is Malevich presiding over the end of all things. But Malevich is there to preside over the end of all things. Why? Because he has escaped the Earth's trajectory. Why? Because he's a suprematist. Why? Because he takes abstraction to be real. Okay. So this is the point. Possibly our globe itself will be pulverized, as once a huge lump was pulverized, creating the globe. The question returns then, is dust 1 the same as dust 2? If, let's say, the Earth itself emerges from pulverization, from dust, escape is the rule and not the exception. That is to say, dust arises, the Earth collapses, escape is achieved. With this in mind, we are returned to the problem first encountered in point 3 above, namely, the place from which all derives is the flight path of dust. Dust is itself emergent from pulverization. However, once again inculcating a behavioral cycle like the tick, but this time holding planetary formation prisoner. The problem this raises is whether antecedent consequent dust are the same. That is, dust at the beginning equal to dust at the end? If 3 is true, then D1 equals D2. That is to say, dust 1 is the same as dust 2. If 6 is false. If 6, then this is false, rather. It is for this reason that 5 raises the theory of action. That's the striving point, if you recall. There is a theory of action implicit in this. For an act occurs just when its consequent was not contained in its antecedent, or just when it introduces a difference, such that, in this instance, D1 is not equal to D2. Malevich's fullest account of the cultures of action occurs in his theory of the additional element in painting. And here it is. Under the signature of the additional element is hidden a whole culture of action, which in painting can be defined by a typical or characteristic state of straight or curved lines. The introduction of new norms, the curved fibrous-shaped additional element of Cézanne, will make the painter different from that caused by the sickle formula of cubism or the straight line of suprematism. After futurism comes a new element, the supreme straight, which I have called the suprematist additional element of dynamic order. The appropriate milieu for it is the air, as the necessary milieu for the airplane, for the aerodynamic structure of planites, aerial suprematism. This further clarifies, if clarification is the right verb, the character of the physical problem that gives rise to the tick cycle, or to the thesis 3 that D1 equals D2. Like a physicist, Malevich's construal of element is not the chemical atom of Boyle or Lavoisier, but rather concerns fundamental forces. Thus, unrestricted by terrestrial curvature, suprematist dynamics provoke the extension of cultures of action across all possible milieu, tearing curvature from the Earth, from its terrestrial support, and refashioning its geometry for the augmented dimensional prospects of the aerial, exchanging planets for planes or planites, grounds for substance for motion. In this way, it also provides a fascinating account of the dynamics of addition. An element is additional or futural, that is, just when it induces actions of which the field in which it does so was previously incapable. Okay? An element is additional or futural just when it induces actions of which the field in which it does so was previously incapable. That's what something is if it is an act or an additional element. Yet addition is neither a mere acceptance of something given, there is a past to which is added a present, nor an elimination of actions determined in or through it, i.e. the past. Cézanne's residual organicism, with its fibrous lines that curl, twist and knot in a botanical fashion, for instance, do not cease their motions under mutation by Cubism's sickle formula. These are the images. Now, there's the Cézanne line. This is the least successful, I think, of Malevich's little characterizations of the additional element in Cézanne. That's Cézanne's line there. That's Cubism. That's totally successful. The middle one is Cubism. I challenge anyone, specifically an analytic Cubism, not to recognize the whole from the part. Yeah? This is Picasso and Braque right up until they discovered collage. And there's Suprematism. This is brilliant. It's utterly brilliant. That's the theory of modern painting and its development. But from it, he produces something quite extraordinary. The stages in this analysis are not stages on which actions subsequently take place, but rather stages in the morphogenesis of those actions themselves, whose antecedent forms are curved. From natural history's hesitant, gravitationally determined curves, therefore, everything tends towards the tick cycle. Suprematism extracts form from all bodies and transforms it into a line. Instead of curves, we have a line. No longer hesitant with regard to the surface, no longer dependent on its food, like I am on chocolate, or like the tick is on the passing sheep once every 50 years. No longer dependent upon these things, a straight line. And yes, I know, a straight line, a goal, as Nietzsche says. This is what the tick is yet to discover, and what the Übermensch will discover, according to Nietzsche, but which the suprematist has already discovered in this single straight line. Okay, that's the beautiful thing. Okay. It is from this perspective that the flight that Malevich talks about, and notice he returns to it in the account from the theory of the additional element in painting. We have here, just 3 lines up from the bottom, the necessary milieu for the aeroplane is the air. Seems apparently pointless to throw that in there, but in fact, it's absolutely central to suprematism. Flight is everything. Has flight taken place or not? It's the only question Malevich wants answering. Has flight taken place or not? It is in this perspective that the flight is minimally different from the Earth from which it emerges. Why the aircraft's motions remain in Earth's orbit as does dust from its surface. It is the world's future, the future of what is both world and rest in Russian, that is the term mir, by means of which its past is first exhibited. The futurability of the Earth, how long it will endure, rather long it has endured, being the true measure according to Kant of its age, becomes finite just when it is destroyed. But its destruction, and this is the second point from the earlier passage to note, is coincident with its creation, just as the aeroplane will fly to the place from whence it has come, remaining dust or a tick on the planet's skin. So which is it? There is an episode from Novalis' Heinrich von Ofterdingen in which, as Anselm Kiefer recounts during his 2011 inaugural lecture at the Collège de France, a man on the eve of his marriage descends into a mine, dies, and remains there until he is discovered 30 years later. His rescuers are shocked at how well preserved his body remains, but upon returning it to the surface, find it to crumble into dust. Kiefer draws the lesson from this that there is an ecology of creation and explanation for the artist, of the subterranean work and its mediated exposure. Work, therefore, at one stratum cannot be raised into work at another without suffering desiccation, destruction, disappearance. I take it this is wrong. Is this why Malevich's airplane becomes dust? Because it decays as it crosses from bowel or mine to surface to air? I want to argue not, and to show that in the course of what follows, neither Malevich nor the Romantics, such as Novalis, conceive of nature as an object in this sense, but rather as an action or a set of actions. Moreover, an action whose essence exceeds the actuality. At issue, therefore, is the fate of nature, or, less romantically perhaps, the nature of nature, or the concept of nature. Perhaps Malevich's account of the aeroplane as a halo of planetary dust that will inevitably fall back to coat the Earth's surface indicates his support for a circular theory of time, so that everything emergent invariably returns. Implicit in this is the implausibility of novelty or the non-occurrence of creation. Okay, so it's not possible, if everything returns, it is not possible to imagine that there is anything to return to, because no leaving has ever taken place. Imagine that everything returns. Now picture an atom. Let's say this atom is destined, in the plan of some non-gravitationally constrained creature, to become an aircraft, and an aircraft so powerful indeed that it will leave the orbit. It will attain exit velocity. It will shake loose from the bowels of the sheep on which, like a tick, it depends, and will head off to the stars. Let's assume this to be the case. And it is therefore differentiated from all the other atoms which are just clustering tick-like around the surface of the sheep. Okay? How would this occur if it is not true that there is any change? We could say it occurs precisely by exception. That is to say, that there is nothing which occurs which can be wholly determinate. Therefore, there are always going to be some exceptions. There's always one that got away. Always one sheep, was missed by a tick. We could say that, but this seems barely adequate to cover the case. If we do argue that there is emergence, even in one instance, even at the atomic level, then there is, as a matter of fact, emergence. The task for explanation is, why, therefore, is there not emergence elsewhere? That is to say, if there is an act in one atom leaving the Earth's orbit, why aren't other atoms similarly active? If they are not, and they merely orbit like dust around the Earth, and even orbiting, incidentally, should be cast into doubt by this very problem. If they're orbiting like dust around the Earth, from which they will never leave, then how is it possible to conceive, in fact, that there is an exception to it? Either all or nothing, therefore. Either emergence or not. Either creation or not. Either historicity and temporality or not. Either the world is eternal or not. Not both. Nothing is both eternal and not eternal. Okay, so I delivered that like it was a fact, but it's fact of reason. Okay, so I don't know. I'm not inviting you, as it were, to think of things that are both eternal and not eternal. Like I don't know. I can't think of anything of that nature. Television. Why is television eternal? It just goes on forever. Yeah, reality TV. That's a program I would like to do. Reality TV spliced with a natural history documentary devoted to the actual emergence of a new universe. That would be great. The actions of atoms are going to be infinitely more entertaining than the actions of stars. That was a joke based on the two meanings of stars. Okay, so either there is action or there is not. The hypothesis, therefore, of D1 equals D2, that is, that there has never been flight, that is, that what departs will return, is ultimately that there has never been creation. What is, insofar as it is, always is, so that the world is eternal. The slightest novelty in such a world, the most meagre additional element, this sequence is inconceivable. And I mean this sequence. I don't mean what this sequence represents. I mean this sequence. In fact, that is inconceivable. The mere shift of a slide is inconceivable. Pardon me? Sorry? No, I was just illustrating that this would be impossible. No, that's for later. My whole point is that time is important. Okay, so the slightest novelty in the world, the meagerest additional element would eliminate the hypothesis. In the present context, a world without flight, is it the same as the world with it? Surely the fact of flight is sufficient to demonstrate that, even if the world were not created, creation, it's nevertheless effected. Yet a perspective switch from geography to geology, from local surface to deep time, that animates Malevich's paradoxical pursuit of the aircraft's inevitable disintegration, its return to whence it came, or, since this is clearly not its home airport, to its mineralogical past. Its importance is that this switch demonstrates that no observable instance is sufficient to refute the hypothesis. The novelty of flight, that is, could well be a phenomenological irritation issuing from the merely local perspective. An accident of sensibility, just as, if there is a cosmological constant, all change is local. Smeared across timescales of planetary formation, the flight remains dust. Thus, in Malevich's mere world is insuperably rest, the absence of motion. How could a mere aircraft escape it? Conversely, however, even dust has its orbits, within which settling is local. The eternity of the world then becomes the accident of an equally local perspective, a temporal geocentrism across all cosmic scales. If there was one Big Bang, that is to say, one instance of creation and one only, there must have been an infinite number of Big Bangs, or, that is to say, a Big Bang does not explain the origin of all things, since it is a local feature of all things. That is to say, if one, then infinite, if infinite, never absent, therefore the Big Bang is eternal. Not the same Big Bang every time, of course. That's the difference. The point to which Malevich's flight draws us, therefore, the limitations of the object as a frame of reference regarding the temporality of creation. Whether the chronometer or measure of things is world, aeroplane, dust, or tick is irrelevant to the problem. Each entails its perspective accidents because in every case the object remains the constant. This is why Malevich introduces striving into the equation. Everything, he says, is striving to leave the globe. And striving is an instance of action, with all the consequences we have discussed. In the context of the passage we have just quoted, this amounts to a proposition that counters the others. The aeroplane is planetary dust, the world is rest. They can only be countered because they concern particular states. So the truth or falsity of the proposition, i.e. the aeroplane is planetary dust, the world is at rest, is timescale dependent. As a simple consequence of the second law of thermodynamics, the aeroplane will be dust and the world will be rest. But I did not board, thankfully, a dust cloud in order to get here, nor is the Earth at a standstill. A key Platonic insight which can be stated of what is time-dependent states that what is time-dependent is neither true nor false, since in the end it will have been both. This is why no empirically observable instance change is going to be sufficient to explain its actuality. For the moment, note the effect on our understanding of the latter propositions introduced by the former. So, here's the first proposition. This is the one that introduced change in the understanding of the following two. Everything is striving. The aeroplane is dust, proposition 2. Proposition 3, the world is rest. Everything is striving, the aeroplane is dust, the world is rest. In proposition 1, we know that an action is predicated of all things, of everything. An action negated if proposition 3 is true. And if everything has the same extension, i.e. covers the same quantity of cases as does world, how this is understood will depend in large measure on what the predicate does to the subject, which again I shall return below. But both propositions 1 and 3 are notably dissimilar to proposition 2, which is the most concretely object-based of the three. This is because it simply asserts of one object that it is another. The aeroplane is dust. Yet in so doing, the copula, that is the is in the proposition, effects or covers the transit between what must, according to the proposition, be considered two states of the one object if the proposition is true. The aeroplane state and the dust state are not accordingly different objects, but just one. And we can see what happens here. If we take it that there is change, but ultimately what does not change is objects are, in other words, then it follows that there is no way of segregating one object from another. All objects become one object, and that one object is eternal. How the copula is therefore to be understood, whether it effects transition or eliminates it, that is to say, when we say the aeroplane is dust, whether the is therefore eliminates the transition between the two, or in fact effects the transition between the two, everything depends on this. If If P3 is true, then no transition at all takes place, so that P3 echoes the eternity of the world hypothesis that Malevich pointed out in point 3 that we looked at earlier in his earlier quote. If P1 is true, then not only, however, is there transition, but the transition retroacts on the everything. Everything is striving, such that no state is taken as primary, or as the substrate for subsequent actions, since every state is subject to striving. P1 is therefore object eliminating, while P3 is transition eliminating. Note, however, that in neither case is it sufficient merely to assert a flight has taken place, or the aeroplane is a tick on the Earth's surface, in order to confirm or deny the hypotheses these propositions entail. Now, the direction of Malevich's own solution to this problem might look like a pragmatic decision, a moment of truth, to paraphrase Badiou with a cliché. And in part, painter that he was, it is, insofar as pragmatic means concerned with the thing, the pragma, or in practice. But the pragmatism issues from an ontology, as the following excerpt from his 1916 Manifesto for Suprematism, the new painterly realism, makes clear. I have destroyed the ring of the horizon and gotten out of the circle of objects, the horizon ring that has imprisoned the artist in the forms of nature. Note both. Yes, imprisoned the artist and the forms of nature. This accursed ring, by continually revealing novelty after novelty, leads the artist away from the aim of destruction. Objects have vanished like smoke. To attain to the new artistic culture, art advances toward creation as an end in itself, and towards domination over the future forms of nature. We see immediately from this quote that Malevich opts for P1 over P3, that is to say, for everything is striving, is true, the world's rest is false, because P2 is both truth and false. P2, remember, states the aeroplane is dust. It's not true just now. I was on a plane, it wasn't dust. It was dusty, but it wasn't dust. Right? However, in 500 years' time, it will be dust. So the plane is both a plane and a dust. This doesn't destroy the object, it destroys the transition, because it makes both states part of one object. Okay. So we see that Malevich opts for P1 over P3 precisely because P2 is both true and false. What is the alternative? Malevich here introduces several key terms that flesh out what became his theory of the world as non-objectivity. Firstly, note that the ring on the horizon imprisons not just the artist, but also the forms of nature. The question, what is this ring, thus arises. Secondly, note that the point is not to liberate nature. This is not we're charging in to let the tigers that maul the zookeepers out of the pens so that they won't be able to maul the zookeepers. They'll maul indiscriminately, and we hope the unemployed. They'll maul and maul and maul as tigers will, and so forth. This is not to liberate nature in this sense, but the pursuit of art's dominion over it. Now, what does this mean? That art can have dominion over nature. What on earth might this mean? How is this dominion to come about? And what does it mean that it can? Thirdly, or that Malevich thinks it can. Thirdly, while art pursues creation as an end in itself, the artist's aim is destruction. In the first instance, of the ring. What then is the ring? The ring consists in continuous novelty. And this may seem to sit ill at ease with the aeroplane is dust. The ring consists in continuous novelty. But remember, the aeroplane both is and is not dust. The continuity of the novelty consists in the change of state, but the change of state does not mean change of object. The ring consists in continuous novelty. But the only novelty within the horizon of continuous novelty would be rest. The ring is accursed because, insofar as it is restless novelty, the only true novelty, rest, is impossible. So that, conversely, because it is ceaseless, absolute novelty is absolute rest. Rest, mere, or the world, lures the artist from destruction and art from creation. Secondly, qua horizon, the ring remains the constant point of reference, not merely for the division of earth from sky, but fixes the coordinates of all transit, sealing reversible motions. The road up is the road down, as Heraclitus has it. Or we can tip the train at one end and then at the other in order to achieve fuel-inexpensive rail travel between cities. The ring is therefore destroyed when objects no longer circumscribe the capacities of creation, when creation cannot be identified with the created. In other words, objects only sum or exhaust their creation when objects are eternal. The ring is accursed because it precisely eternalizes objects, novelties, and thus imprisons the forms of nature or reduces them to repetition of a finite number. Let me pause there and just say something about why this question of the ring arises in the context that I've been setting out. We were asking a question about the copula. What is the is that conjoins the airplane to dust on the one hand, that conjoins everything to striving on the other? The copula is simply the is. The question was, is that transition or act eliminating? Does it get rid of change? Does it say the airplane and dust are one? Or does it effect change? Malevich's account of the ring is precisely what eliminates change insofar as the ring is constant. It is constant novelty. It matters little whether, therefore, we say it's constant novelty or eternal rest. In fact, there is no meaningful difference between them. Constant novelty means nothing that is not novel, which means that everything is novel. With respect to what, all of a sudden, we must ask? If everything is new, if everyone is a revolution, where is the revolution? If everything is changing all the time, what is it that in fact is changing? If change is a constant, is this a conservative state or a radical one? Yeah? These questions arise precisely by virtue of the ring as the copula that eliminates transition and conjoins, therefore, antecedent with consequent states, such that rather than the one exhausting the other, it is permanent. This is orbit, this is dust, this is the tick and the sheep. I was doing orbit this way and the tick and the sheep that way. Just for the camera. Okay. Okay, I'm going to jump over that, I think. What this raises then, what the copula raises, what discussing it raises, is the question of what operations are in fact undertaken by it. What is it that it does in conjoining two things? Are there two things that are conjoined, or is the act that conjoins itself a species of the acts that are the things conjoined? And this is really where we started from. This is exactly the theory of the act promulgated by, for example, Novalis, but also by Schelling. It's the romantic account of act. It's everything is striving. Okay. So the ring is that bond. What are these operations then? The conceiving of these operations entails the conceiving of something that cannot itself be the content of any sensible representation. That is to say, that's very paraphrasing, that is to say the following. If we conceive an operation that takes place in nature, let's say sight, right? If we conceive an operation like sight as involving what it actually does involve, that is to say, the refraction, the double inversion of light, the coincidence of optic nerve and brain, and so on and so forth, all these connections and all these actions. If we conceive of light in this way, at no point is it ever possible that that light be the content of a sensible representation. That is to say, I can have no empirical instance of the actual behavior of light. I can augment my possibilities of seeing by means of various technologies. I can study light insofar as it has effects in one context or another. I can even split light. I can do all these experiments, but I cannot see light insofar as it is the light involved in my seeing. Right? So we know we see by way of light. We can prove this, in fact, if we turned out all the lights. And if we did that, I could also show you a picture of Malevich's black square on black. Actually, it wasn't his. It's Barnett. No, it wasn't Barnett Newman. Oh. There was another contemporaneous suprematist, Rodchenko. Rodchenko did a black square on black, 1917, and Malevich's white square on, or black square on white was 1916. You can see there's a logical progress involved in this. Yeah? So if we're conceiving of these operations that take place, and they really take place, they cannot be the content of any sensible representation. That means they are non-imageable. Nor, therefore, are they exhausted in a sensory representation. That is to say, no operation, insofar as it's an operation that underwrites what it is that's going on when, for example, we see, can itself be the content of what it is we see. It's involved in its production, inalienably so, but it cannot be the content of what we see. Just as you cannot, in fact, think of your own biography absolutely. Try and think of your whole biography, absolutely. So every detail, nothing is lost, all is dust, everything remains, continuous novelty, the ring. Try, in other words, and make a copula out of your entire life. And it will be a ring because it will always get to a now. And that now will always be the point that differentiates the place you've just got to from the place you now are. So you've just recovered all the salient facts about your own history, right? All your biography. You got it up to this point. But then you've stopped in order to say, I've just assembled all the salient points in my autobiography. There is a bit missing all of a sudden. And that's the bit between the biography when it stopped and the biography that continues because it includes the statement, I've just assembled all the salient facts about my autobiography. Right? So there is no point at which an autobiography is ever going to be complete. You might say that there is, and that's when, if you wait till you're dead. But I think that's a good reason to assume that an autobiography will in fact not be completed. There's only one hypothesis that I've seen that manages to make some sense of that it will be completed after you're dead, and that's Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Facts in the Case of Monsieur Valdemar, which consists of hypnotizing someone and refusing to let them go even though they have died. Let me go, I'm dead, says Monsieur Valdemar. And the doctor, of course, ignores him. It's for your own good. Surely existence is better than inexistence. It's not a value judgment, I'm in agony. Absolutely fantastic. So this is the only way in which it would be possible to write a biography, you might imagine, that includes all the salient facts. But then wait, your biography now includes death. And then I died would be a factual realist statement that would have content precisely because it's from that position that you're now writing your autobiography. So, and then I died. So you've just realized that when I died is the stopping point of your autobiography, but the realization means that the autobiography isn't complete, and so on and so forth. Even death can't make an autobiography complete. There's no such thing as a complete autobiography. That's just in our terms, but it's true of anything in which the antecedent is not reducible to its consequent. In fact, it's true of anything to which the principle of sufficient reason doesn't apply. That is to say, it's true of anything of which it is true to say that the whole cause is not equivalent to the whole effect. And I think, although there's much more there, I think I should stop. In my determination to speak slowly, I not only stumbled over many words, but I also left half the paper. So my apologies.